Hello, how's it going?
It's going okay. I am waiting on a job that I applied for, and I feel like I have spent my whole year waiting for things, and my capacity to wait is running out. And so I am just sitting here waiting. Hopefully, I'm going to hear something to sometime today. So I'm really glad I'm recording with you today because that is something that will keep my mind off of this at least for a couple of hours. So that's how I'm doing. How are you doing?
Mm, that waiting is so hard. I am doing pretty well. This week, just in a couple of days, my youngest son turned 16. He's going to get his license. I'm sure that he will pass his driver's test. And that will mean a huge change for our family as he gets to be independent and drive himself to school and track practice and karate and all the other things he wants to do. And we don't have to be a part of it. But also, we don't get to be a part of it, which is the other side of the coin, right? And so less time with him. I don't know. A lot of changes about to happen.
Yeah. And this is your last one. So you are officially
Paying a lot in
hanging
car
up.
insurance.
Yes, that is for sure. Not what I was going to say, but oh my goodness, you are absolutely right. It's so expensive.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. But what were you really going to say?
I was just going to say you're hanging up your chauffeur hat.
Yes. Yeah. Kind of fun.
Yeah, congratulations. And maybe we need to start a Patreon to be able to help you afford all the insurance that you're paying.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, I think when you become a parent, people are like, oh my gosh, you have to spend so much money on diapers. I'm like, man, can we go back to the diaper stage? That was way cheaper.
Oh, yes, it's just big invisible chunks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
So, but yeah, what is on your mind for today's episode?
Oh man, I am so excited to talk today. We talked last week about these stages of faith, and I loved that conversation. It was one of my favorite conversations we may have ever had.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And it actually, as our conversations so often do, it left me thinking in a different direction that now I have even more questions.
Hmm.
Uh, which is good and complicated all at the same time. And so I want to talk about the end goal of spiritual growth today, how we define maturity. Because any process, any set of stages, any pathway assumes a knowledge of the end that you're trying to achieve. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
And I've been over the last week just thinking more and more about how we talked about the ways in which the generation before us really was very different in the way it discipled and where we felt like it was in these stages of faith in terms of the corporate expression of this. But one of the things that's really interesting to me is that the church as I grew up in it, I don't mean my immediate local church, though that too, but the sort of broader evangelical church as I understood it, I would say that the definition of maturity had to do with clarity. I know exactly what I believe. I know this is right and that is wrong, and this is true and that is false. And maturity was almost getting to a granular level on that sort of clarity. I know if I'm pre-trib or post-trib. Uh, I I know if oh, what are the fancy words for that mean God determined his plan before creation or just after creation? Um,
Well, there's the lapsarian or supralapsarian.
Superlapsarian. Yes, that's exactly. I don't know if I'm describing that very well in my 30-second attempt to describe the superlapsarian
Yeah,
view of God's
it's
sovereignty. But
it's technically, did God choose to save the world before man fell or after?
there we go. Thank you. Yes, that. So again, but this is let's get super granular on our clarity on knowing the truth.
Yeah.
And yet, what we described in those stages of faith that we both instantly affirmed really was based on an assumption that spiritual maturity was more open to the gray areas rather than putting everything in black and white boxes.
Hmm. So this is so fascinating. So just for our audience, a little peek into how On the Phone with Josh works before we hit record. We talk through various things that interest us and on a broad level and where we might want to go and what conversations we might want to have. But as soon as we hit on something that is really interesting to both of us, we pause the conversation and say, I don't want to talk about this at all until we hit record on the podcast. That way it's live and it's natural and it's like we actually get to have that conversation recorded. And so we have started this conversation. We have brought the conversation to this point, I think 3 different times now.
Mm-hmm.
And I have every single time been very, very silent and said, I don't want to respond right now. I want to do it on the podcast. And now I finally get to respond.
All right. Fire away. Tell me your thoughts because I have been looking forward so much to actually hearing them.
Yeah. Well, so I actually have a long series of thoughts, but I want to continue the conversation is really what I want to do. And I'm intrigued by the fact that you keyed into this idea of lack of certainty as a hallmark of where we were heading. That is not something I had picked up on. And so I wonder, what about our conversation, or what about the author's definition of, say, stage 6 leads you that direction?
It's so interesting. Okay, so here is what I was perceiving. And it'll be interesting because if you don't see this, that means it's me, not it means my personal definition rather than the definition we were working off of that they were providing, which very well could be the case. But let's start at the wall, right? Like it feels to me like stage 1, recognition of God, you get saved. Stage 2, life of discipleship, we're giving you some clarity. Stage 3, we're having you serve in the local church. So you're getting grounded in specifics of what you believe and who you believe among and your place in the community. But then when we talked about the wall, a huge part of what we talked about that really struck me was the fact that we needed to hold open space for people who are wrestling with their faith in a way that doesn't force them to get where we want them to get anymore, right? Like there was a sense, even we talked about the fact that mainline churches, which tend to be a little bit or a lot more liberal in their sort of definition of theology, often have been better at walking with people through the wall and stage 4 than evangelical churches because they're more comfortable with the ambiguity that those stages invite. So I think it started there, then moving outward from there to the journey outward and the life of love. Part of this is recognizing love as the end goal as opposed to truth being the end goal. And I don't mean to put those in opposition. However, I think that if I had had this sort of 6-stage process described to me by the evangelicalism of the 1980s, stage 6 would have been the life of truth.
Yeah, it's okay. So this is really fascinating. You're picking up on aspects of the definition that I actually think are secondary. And
Mm-hmm.
so can I just get real personal for a moment and describe my experience with stage 4 to help illustrate why I think differently about these latter stages?
Yeah, go ahead.
So stage 4, I'm going to pull that document back up and just remind our audience. This is characterized by a growing awareness of personal weakness, motivations, and sins, a deeper dependence on God's grace and love, and it's often accompanied by solitude, prayer, and introspection. So this is that journey inward. And the challenges are to let go of old patterns and beliefs and face unresolved emotional or spiritual wounds. The certainty and the theological precision that you learn in stage 2 and you exercise in stage 3 became insufficient for me, because what I was able to do in stages 2 and 3 was hide behind theology and hide behind really good involvement in the church. And I did not have to come face to face with myself and face to face with a personal God who could be other than I imagined him to be. And so what stage 4 was for me was to get a grip on who I was, where my emotional wounds are, where I have unhealthy ways of relating to God, and learning to understand that God is a personal being way beyond my control, way beyond my ability to define him accurately in some theology or some way I've been taught. And so to allow God to break out of the bounds that I had put him in and allow him to be as changing, unpredictable, personal as he truly is, and then try to find a new way to relate to God in light of who I am, the ways in which I am broken, the ways in which I have related to him poorly, and my limited understanding of him in a personal way. And so I had to develop genuinely a personal relationship with God that exceeded any theological definition. And out of that comes this deep trust, because you can trust the person of God, not just your theology about God. And that is an experiential thing that you can only get to by going through this journey inward. There is a level of trust that only comes after you've wrestled through all of this and really worked it all out. And so then this journey outward, they talk about it being, particularly in stage 6, it says, that the life of love is characterized by a complete trust in God's plan, even in uncertainty. And I feel like it's from that deep trust that has only been built over a lifetime that one can live from a place of love, and one can live from a deep concern for justice, mercy, the well-being of others, because only then do you really settle in and you're like, I am safe. I am good. I am in the protection, the love, the relationship with God that really satisfies. I don't need anything more. I'm good, and I can live my life for others. So to me, that is not about less certainty. It's about being certain of a who and not a what.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on some things that absolutely make sense to me. I deeply resonate with what you're saying. It leaves the underlying question that I think I have, which is, this is still a shift, I think, from what I was hearing in the church a generation or two ago. Maybe it's a shift from accuracy to authenticity. Maybe it's a shift from, and I'm really actively trying not to say it's a shift from truth to love, because I don't think it really is. I think it's a shift from something like let's be accurate to let's be relational.
Mm.
I really, I love your way in which you see the stage two, the sort of discipleship stage, being foundational to the way that you process through these later stages. You said that last time, and I really appreciate the fact that you're bringing us back to that this time, because I think that makes a ton of sense. When I look at this, I think what I see as ambiguity, and this is what I meant, it perhaps is a recognition that the universe is a highly ambiguous place. Not that God is ambiguous. Your sense of relational knowledge of God allows you to acknowledge the gray area of the world. Even as far as, and this is what I think I perceive in folks who have moved farther along this journey, a willingness to let others be where they're at without trying to force them into any of the boxes that I used to have.
Yeah. It's interesting that we're talking about this, though, because so much of this corresponds to our postmodern society, right?
Yes, this is exactly where I'm going. Yes, please. Yes, say this.
So modernism was really defined by this idea of certainty. And I know what I know when we can find absolute answers to things, and there is absolute truth. There is an absolute whatever. And postmodernism has seen the ways in which that pursuit and that belief system has failed. There are things that we just cannot know, or there are things that don't have absolutes attached to them. And so our postmodern shift has been all the way to this, like, you cannot know anything kind of idea, which is an overcorrection. And so that's where earlier you said that mainline churches are often better at dealing with this than evangelical churches. And I would challenge that. I do think they offer more opportunity and they're more willing to engage the gray. But I don't know that they help you resolve it better. And the reason I say that is because I think they tend to fall more in line with the postmodern nothing can be known so everything is okay idea, when that is not actually how God works. Not everything is okay. Not every conception of God is equal. And so I do think we have to strike this balance between the certainty of theology and the certainty of modernist thought on God and the postmodern everything is permissible because nothing could be known anyway.
Yeah, you're answering my question before I even asked it. Because this is exactly what I actually was having this conversation with someone just the other day. It feels like a lot of folks who talk about these later stages of the spiritual journey often are right in line with what I would expect of a spiritual experience deeply influenced by postmodernism. It's spot on with the culture.
Mm.
And whenever I hear that, it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. But whenever we as followers of Jesus are spot on with the culture, it just leads me to want to pause and
Of
say, hold on
course.
a minute. Like, that, again, doesn't mean we're right or wrong. It just means let me pause and make sure I'm not swallowing something whole. And I think your distinction that you're offering, really what you're saying is there's something that needs to be gained from modernism. There is a truth. That truth can be perceived.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also something to be gained from postmodernism. There is something fundamentally relational about the universe. There are things and areas of relating to the universe as a whole in which there is far more ambiguity than we want there to be. And we need to be careful where we are applying our truth lens. Modernism said, my truth must be your truth. Postmodernism says, I can have my truth and you can have your truth. I think as
Mm.
Christians, we are wanting to say, there is a truth. I want to check how I stack up to that truth. I want to be aware of how you stack up to that truth, but it's not my job to force you check on how you stack up to that truth.
Yeah. This is so awesome that we're having this conversation, because this is, in my mind, this conversation defines stage 4.
Mm-hmm.
This is, you take all of the certainty that you had in stage 2 when you were being discipled and trained in the truths of the faith, and you just, what you know, and it feels so good to like have some answers. And then you start working outward and volunteering, and you're working in the church and in the kingdom, and you just feel like, yes, okay, I'm a part of this thing. This is great. And then you start going, wait a minute, this certainty only gets me so far. At the heart of Christianity is this relationship, and that really can't be defined and predicted. And so where does certainty end and where does ambiguity begin? And how do I navigate that? And so then you start calling everything into question, because you're like, wait a minute, is everything I was certain about not true? And then you start putting all the pieces back together, and you're like, no. Okay, no, it's okay to be certain about that. That is just a bedrock truth. Okay, great. Now move on to the next topic. And on down the line you go, and you're just lost in a swirl of like, where are the lines here? So it's not like you're questioning every aspect of the faith. It's not like you're wondering if there's a God or something. It's just, I don't know how the pieces fit together, and I don't know how to relate to the whole anymore. So how do I put it all back together in a way that feels right?
Well, and this raises two thoughts for me. One is how wildly important it is to have the right mentors in your life early on in the journey that can walk with you through these stages.
Yeah.
But one of the keys to being the right mentor when somebody is hitting the wall and then trying to get through it in stage 4, I think, and this is really hard, this actually matches parenting in a lot of ways. When a kid is like 3 or 4, you're doing a lot of things for them, right?
Yeah.
One of the processes of parenting, I think, is learning how to stop doing things for your kids.
Right.
Right? Like that is the constant challenge, is to figure out where that line is. And I
Yeah.
feel like the greatest danger in stage 4 is to be the spiritual mentor version of a helicopter parent who's trying to put the pieces back together for you.
Well, right. I think it's two-sided. I think you're speaking from our evangelical side, which is the danger
Sure.
we tend to fall into, which is that helicopter parent, no, you got to believe this way. You got to do these things. This is how you resolve this. Let me fix this. But then you talk about the mainline churches, which is an absentee parent. Like there's no direction. It's like all questions are welcome and all answers are welcome. Go right ahead. And neither of those is good. I think they're opposite pitfalls.
I think you're absolutely right. Because to say to someone, and I think this is what we've seen a lot of in the deconstruction movement, by having to leave evangelicalism to ask questions honestly, a lot of the folks I know who are deconstructing, there isn't an implication that eventually they need to get to something else.
Mm.
And even, our evangelical assumption is the framework can handle it. And one of the things that I've seen a lot of, and this is really heartbreaking to me, because we're not inviting people who are in our evangelical framework to deconstruct in an evangelical context, when they realize that pieces of their evangelicalism, like there are a lot of folks I know now that I'm in the Midwest who grew up not knowing the line where evangelicalism began or ended and hyper conservative politics began.
Mm.
It was all sort of the same muddle. And by having to leave our context completely in order to safely ask some questions about deconstructing that model of Christianity, I feel like a lot of times the things that there are lots of things in there that I'm like, no, that's not evangelicalism. That's just, yeah.
Right.
Like, no, you're not, I would reject that too. And yet they're rejecting other things that I don't even think they notice they're rejecting because none of their conversation partners are in the evangelical sphere.
Yeah.
Because they see it all as tied together and therefore dispense with it all.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
this is
yeah.
not everybody. I'm just saying this is a pitfall. I have seen some folks who are deconstructing not due to their own negligence, but due, I think, to our inability to have conversations with folks who are deconstructing. I think they are forced into this unfortunate baby out with the bathwater moment.
Yeah. And maybe, oftentimes language really helps or distracts from what we're intending to do. And I feel like language in this moment may also be playing a role. Deconstruction is a term that I associate with a slow, steady pace of leaving the faith. And maybe others have that definition of deconstruction as well. And so that's where I really like the language used by these authors, that this is like the wall and the journey inward. Because what we often miss with deconstruction in our language is the concept of reconstruction. And I think that is probably, if we're going to use even a similar term, I think I would rather use reconstruction to paint the picture of taking what we thought we had built, or how we thought we should be relating to God, or our understanding of God, and rearranging it in light of, oh wait, God is a person and not just a thing to study, and all of these different things. We have to reconstruct our world and our way of relating to God. That is a different thing than deconstructing and tearing down all of our faith that's been passed on to us. Because in the end, I think we keep the faith that's been passed down to us. We just relate to it differently than we did before.
Well, and I think different people have different outcomes here, right? Like, I don't think
Sure.
there's one outcome or another outcome. I think there's a lot of different outcomes. And a lot of this is refinement, right? Like purification in the sense of getting rid of the dross. What really is the faith that was passed down to us? And what were the things that, and I think this is where the journey inward, I love that language because it's not an evaluation of them. It's an evaluation of what I've been holding. And that could mean hurt because of the church I was in. Like, I'm not trying to say that it's invalid to wrestle with that, because I think there are real spiritual hurts that happen because the church is a broken place. But the primary focus is me dealing with me.
Well, yeah, I think me dealing with me and me dealing with God, right?
Yes. Okay. Yes, absolutely.
And so how can we exactly we strip it all down? Either because we've been taught some bad theology, we've had some bad church hurt, we've had some negative experiences in our own life, and we have to heal those emotional wounds or those relational wounds, or whatever it is. It's this journey inward to like really sort through, okay, who am I? Where am I? Who is God? How do I relate to him? And that takes whatever it takes, and it is precipitated by whatever it's precipitated by, which is why you need a wise guide. And maybe this is where you're getting to your ambiguity piece. That's going to be very different for everybody. The entrance point is going to be different. The wall is going to be different. And the work that you need to do in the journey inward is going to be different for every person. But I think the authors do a good job of saying, okay, here are the overall challenges. However it looks for you, here's the overall challenges. And here's what it looks like to successfully resolve those challenges, even if our paths and the stuff that we have to work out is slightly different for everybody. And so you need a wise mentor who is willing to flex with your version of events and walk you through that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I love the fact that it invites these habits of solitude, prayer, and introspection. The successful navigating of this requires deep and ongoing amounts of time.
Mm.
I don't know if I've said this on the podcast recently or ever, but I have found myself in many circumstances recently saying that I believe that God is sitting behind a two-way mirror. Have I said that on the podcast recently or ever?
No.
It's the best image I can come up with to say you cannot face God without facing yourself.
Mm.
And that, I think, is a huge part of why silence, solitude, if I can, one of the things I remember you describing in this journey for you is the authenticity of prayer that
Yeah.
grew.
Yeah.
Meaning you were willing to bring your whole self into the prayer experience. And I think that is very ambiguous. I think it means, as the person mentoring someone in this situation, I'm not answering their questions for them. I'm not even trying to put the pieces together. I'm just loving them, empathizing with them, believing in confidence what I have found the truth about God to be for myself, but not putting the pieces together for them.
Right. Yeah. And constantly pointing back to God. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, take it up with him. Take it to prayer. That's all I can tell you to do. Keep praying. Keep seeking. Right? I think a wise mentor holds hope for somebody and gives them the space to be wherever they're at and continues to hold that hope and point to Jesus and keeps doing that for as long as it takes.
I think you're exactly right. And knowing that, and this is again where I think the distinction is, that where we're aiming, it is as important how you live your life as it is, and perhaps more important how you live your life than the minutia of your theology, right? This is aiming towards loving God and loving others, because that is the heart and soul of the Christ-like way, rather than I'm going to stand for the things I believe in and I'm going to die on this hill and I'm going to joyfully debate with you whether you should be a supralapsarian or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, this speaks so much to my own journey through stage 4. So maybe this is highly idiosyncratic, or maybe it has truth for everybody. I don't know. But I think loving God and loving others, of course, right? These are the great commandments. But for me, it is all bedrocked by a profound experiential trust that allows you to love God and to love others from a place of security, from a place of assuredness, relational assuredness. And that's different than theological assuredness. And so it's hard for me to put it into words, but like you said, where we're heading matters greatly for how we get there. And sometimes I think it's easy to think that in stage 3, you have arrived at love God, love others, because you have learned a lot about God and you have an affection for God and you're loving others because you're serving. And so it's easy to deceive yourself into thinking, but I'm in stage 6.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I needed to go through a profound shift of, no. There's like some real trust issues that you have with God that you have to work through. And only until you can truly trust God can you really move forward and then arrive back at love God, love others at the end. And I'm hoping to get there. But to me, there was something that needed to shift internally.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think it takes a huge amount of courage, like I said, to be willing to face that. But absolutely. One of the things I mentioned, the dark night of the soul last time as well, but this idea that I mentioned last time that St. John of the Cross mentions, that early on, our carnal nature, this isn't his language, but our carnal nature simply latches onto our spirituality, and we are getting functionally what he would probably call carnal pleasure from spiritual activities. So again, it's the, man, aren't I awesome because I'm growing in my faith? Like it's a little emotional hit to my like positive boost to my pride. It's a little boost to my ego. It makes me feel good. I enjoy it. It's all about those things, which are really the places where pride and greed and those kinds of things come from. And so he
Yeah.
talks about the ways in which the spiritual habits have to be unfulfilling for a season, and that season can be very, very long, in order to refine those things out of you.
Mm,
And I think this is what happens. This is the difference between 3 and 6, right? In stage 3, you're loving God and loving others, but you have no idea how much you're doing it for yourself.
mm, mm.
And
That matches my experience.
that matches mine as well. And it matches virtually everyone I know who's gone through this. You just don't know how prideful you're being. And the process of the wall, you're running full steam, you hit the wall and you're like, oh, that was horrible. Um, and then
Well, even in the challenges described in stage 4, right? A growing awareness of personal weakness, motivations, and sins. You come smack dab in the middle of that. You hit that wall and you go, oh, that's what's going on in my soul and in my mind and in my heart. Okay, that's rough.
And not pleasant to admit, frankly.
Right.
Like, not like this is not you're inevitably going to admit this.
For sure.
This is I just think it's a polar plunge for your spiritual life.
Oh, that's a great way to, yes. Hence the wall, right? This isn't just, oh, you move casually from stage 3 to stage 4. No, there is a wall between stage 3 and stage 4. It is so disorienting, like a polar plunge. That's a great way to describe it. And it really leaves you breathless. Like, whoa, where am I now?
Yeah. It is so fascinating to me that we have to deal with this on our way to the journey outward, which is stage 5, and then the life of love, which is stage 6. But it makes sense to me when I see how often, on a very day-to-day level, my own interior life saps the energy from me that I would love to give to other people.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I say this about folks in ministry all the time. They don't have the margin, and therefore they're not living out of their best selves.
Well, I think that characterizes all of us, regardless of
Yes,
if you're in
no,
full-time ministry.
absolutely. I think that's exactly right. And what the margin we really mean is there's some parts of you got to deal with.
Yeah.
Again, like kind of coming for full circle here. If our goal were the life of truth as the end of the journey, ironically, dealing with our baggage may not be necessary, because I could memorize some stuff and it'd be okay.
Mm.
The life of love simply requires my best self, which in turn requires me to deal with my baggage and secondarily to develop. I love this thing that you've come back to a couple of times, to develop a sort of sense of safety that comes from knowing God personally in the midst of the ambiguity of life. So I'm not confident in how circumstances are going to turn out, but I know him, so it's going to be okay. It's okay. It's just okay. And I can't say I'm always in that space, but I can see how learning to be in that space would give me space in my own life, emotional energy in my own life to love others on a whole different level, and how important that is, how powerful that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, it just makes me want to continue looking for examples in my life or mentors in my life that have arrived at, say, stage 6 and just latch onto them and say, walk with me, please. Show me how to navigate all of this.
Yeah, that's it exactly. And honestly, one of the fascinating things to me is you can't tell when you first know somebody where they're at on this journey. You have to get to know them, and slowly you discover.
Yes, because which weird and why it's so easy to deceive ourselves in stage 3 that we may be in stage 6. The behaviors look very similar. I would assume.
Yeah, they really do. I think they do.
But what's
if
going
anything,
on underneath
in a traditional church sense, in a traditional church context, somebody in stage 3 may be more visible.
Yes.
Somebody in stage 6 may be just not all that visible in the day-to-day operations of a church.
Right. Well, I want to take a moment and turn to the audience and just once again ask, where do you put yourself in these stages of faith? What are you currently navigating? Do you know somebody who has hit the wall? Have you hit the wall? And how are you navigating that? And then we would really love if you would share both last week's episode and this week's episode with somebody, particularly in stage 4. It is such a complicated and difficult stage that we don't often talk about. And we'd love to start conversation for folks that are in that stage. That would just be awesome.
Yeah, honestly. And I think that that's exactly what this is all about, right? Is who in my life can I have a transparent conversation about where I'm really at in these stages of faith?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And that's the conversation we're inviting you to this week.
Yes. Well, Josh, another great conversation. I think we have burned up all of our time for thoughts. So what do you think about moving directly into a Which Josh question?
I think that makes a ton of sense. Let's go ahead and do it.
Okay. Well, this week, our Which Josh question is rather intriguing. Which Josh believes that Jesus loves hurting people?
Yes. And this is me.
Defend yourself.
So I believe this was in preparation for a sermon at my church in Boston. And you just, especially when you're doing any kind of public speaking, you have to be really careful about what you say, how you say it, and particularly, there's often a difference between saying something in a sermon and putting it up on the screen as a main point. Does all this kind of make sense?
Yeah.
As a background? Yep. Okay, so here's the thing. What I wanted to say is that Jesus loves hurting people. That is to say, people who are hurting are loved by Jesus.
Oh, that's not what you said, though.
Well, it is. It could be Jesus loves hurting people can mean either one, right?
True.
That's the problem. So putting it up on this, like intonation in a sermon would clarify which one I meant. But the minute I put it up on the screen, I think I was like practicing. And one of the other staff members was like, you can't put that on the screen, Pastor Joshua. Just look at that again. I had to, because I fully, like, this was going to be the main title slide of my sermon.
Oh yeah.
Like,
no.
This was, because you can imagine how the fact that hurting people are loved by Jesus is a great sermon topic.
For sure. Until Jesus caused the hurt.
But Jesus loving the act of doing harm to people is not a great sermon topic. What with it not being biblical. And so, yes, I had to find different language for this.
Okay. Yes. Language matters. And we revisited that again here at the end. That's great.
Always. But anyway, are you up to talk again next week?
As long as you don't hurt me.
Well, it's not me. It's Jesus you have to worry about.
Oh, okay. And then I guess I'm fine. Yeah, let's talk
Josh
next week.
Josh from Missouri loves hurting people.
Okay. Yes.
All
let's
right.
talk next week.
I'll see you then.
All right. Bye.
Bye.